we are about to resume the sitting here, our live coverage of the Senate sitting for today, 4th May 2023. The sitting commenced earlier today and just broke for lunch. And of course, as they broke, the proposal was to recommence at 2:30. And so far, three of the senators have spoken. We had Senator Gubian Ferdinand, Senator Pauline Antoine Prosper. Well, we have just heard the all rise by the Sergeant at Arms, which is an indication that the President follows, and of course the clerk and the House is about to commence. The sitting of the Senate is about to recommence.
Senators, when the House rose, the question was that the Appropriation 2023-2024 bill be read a second time. Senator Aziz.
Good afternoon, Madam President, fellow senators. What a pleasure it is to be able to share some thoughts and some words on the 2023 appropriation bill before the House, before the Senate. Before I jump into these few thoughts, let me also add my voice to the parents and the kids undergoing all this stress and anxiety at today's CPEA. Last year, I put in my time, so I can fully identify with the trauma. But how wonderful it is at the end of it to come out having acquired that discipline, that commitment to doing what is called upon you to do. Let me also share in the congratulations to the team at Viewford Comprehensive Secondary School Campus B. Yes, I caught the look on the face of the good leader of government business when he heard that I taught at Viewford Comprehensive. Yes, a few of my proudest years. It's lost on many that, I actually did go through St. Mary's College here, and I actually did time at St. Aloysius R.C. Boys School. I did time at Sir Arthur Lewis Community College as well. Served as the president of the student council there, vice president of the student branch of the NYC. So I've been around the block. And so I'm always pleased to quietly celebrate in the background the accomplishments of these entities. Let me also extend congratulations to the nominees and the award winners at the recently held Jimmy Awards. This thing took us some time to plan, and I still remember the conversation we had at the meeting of the Tourism Advisory Committee when, the SLHTA tabled for discussion the critical need for us to reintroduce these awards and to celebrate with our people their hard work, their commitment, and their accomplishments coming through the pandemic. Make no doubt about it, our success rides on the back and shoulders of our workers, and we cannot spare any expense when it comes to celebrating it. It was memorable for me because I really wasn't expecting so many people to turn out. I saw over 500 industry employees, private sector companies, and community organizations who were all in attendance. And I tell you, for the team members who were there, it made all the difference in the world. They felt valued, they felt they were making a contribution, and they felt part of the economic engine. It was a watershed moment. It was a watershed moment for our industry as we celebrated these best practices and operating standards. Now we hope that the best practices will go viral as we hold each other accountable for defending the gains made in this tourism industry over the past 6 decades. For me, the most striking takeaway from the Jimmies, Madam President, was the marked improvement in the embrace of our tourism industry. As more stakeholders begin to appreciate its value in not only economic development, but in building citizens and communities. And this nation building of our tourism industry is of particular interest to independent senators and wider civil society, because this sector has become arguably the largest constituency in our country. Given the lengths and extent of its tentacles, its interests touch every home and community everywhere on this island. And through the exceptional work of the Ministry of Tourism in recent times, community tourism is now a catchphrase in every household in our communities. Notwithstanding this reach, Madam President, the only influencer, to my mind, which trump those of this economic sector are the influences of civil society, whose influence span and transcend parliamentary constituencies and geographic spaces. As such, Madam President, I expect that irrespective of my preoccupation as a tourism professional, my few moments today will reflect on the concerns and the interests of civil society, as I kept this in the forefront of my mind while going through the various pieces of literature in preparation for today's debate. So now I rise in the shadows of the presentation of the 2023-24 budget estimates presented to the lower house and debated since last week. Naturally, I will address the issues related from a civil society perspective and the national community at large, but I will also touch on other related issues spanning the wider societal broadband. Madam President, this appropriation bill follows on the heels of some exceptional programs launched last fiscal year. I went through with a critical eye the Prime Minister's address, and I struggled to find fault with zero-rated VAT on a number of items. I struggled to find fault with a tax amnesty, with tax refunds, with waiver of taxes on penalties, interest, and fines. Struggled to find fault with the issue of waiver of withholding taxes on contracts below $10,000, renewable energy consensus. It goes on and on and on. Some of these programs, which are supported in this year's estimates of expenditure and in this year's appropriation bill, are programs which had their genesis last year or were seeded last year, and if delivered as promised, will find themselves fit for purpose in this dynamic and constantly shifting global economic landscape. These programs have committed millions of dollars earmarked for Youth Economy Agency, medium enterprises, small enterprises, micro enterprises, Community Tourism Agency, and hundreds of youth trained under the much celebrated, at least from a private sector point of view, generation of employment through private sector development project, otherwise known as the JEPSED project, which last year I believe sought to expose some 600 young people to technical vocational skills training and certification, prepping them for the demand within the tourism industry. Each of these projects were designed to address specific problems desperately advocated for by civil society organizations. So it fits and meets a need. The new Youth Economy Agency is definitely a boon to young people who want to turn their hobbies into incomes and habits into sustainable earnings through innovative thinking. And it must be both welcomed and loudly applauded based on what I understand to be high levels of interest shown by our youth with smart business ideas. The declared intent, Madam President, is to encourage and ensure the breakdown of barriers to engage and participation and access for our young people to funds from financial institutions and government entities who in the past have been accustomed to simply tightening purse strings whenever it comes to plans for spending on our youth. And it is refreshing to see this paradigm shift occurring before our very eyes. Repeatedly, my colleague, Independent Senator, and I have advocated for sufficient outreach and engagement programs to include those holding the purse strings, so they too can understand that we have moved to the stage where MSMEs can and have staked their claim as being as important as big business and are just as deserving of our trust and our support. So here's hoping the barriers come down faster than the amount of time it took to institutionalize these programs. But these solutions initiated last year, Madam President, are but some solutions to some of the problems. Many others still plague us, whether we speak of crime and punishment, whether we speak of cost of living, whether we speak of youth neglect and restlessness, the attitudes to our women, the LGBTQI rights, or transparency and accountability. Sadly, so many of these problems have, over the past years, been perceived as revolving door problems that we continue to approach in the same old ways over time without looking at them with new eyes or from fresh or different perspectives. As anticipated by many in civil society and the private sector, the 2023 Appropriation Bill, in the spirit of so many of its predecessors, promises more spending beyond what we are able to generate in revenue, in the hopes of solving some of these age-old problems. Madam President, even as we celebrate some of the key promises of the appropriation bill, such as the tax amnesty, and many of which have been elaborated upon very eloquently by government senators, we must stay focused on the revolving door problems which threaten the successful impact of the provisions being made in the appropriation bill. After years of repeated efforts, it feels sometimes as though we are mastering the art of growing our own problems. We have long lived with creating and sustaining some of our longest lasting problems. Case in point, over $33 million budgeted for the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Security, Rural Development this year, yet each year we're expertly growing our food import bill. Not good enough. While neglecting local produce, we seem to enjoy buying fresh apples without ever wondering how long ago they were picked, while our mangoes continue to fall to the ground to be feasted on by flies, mainly because we don't see or treat what is local better than what is imported. Today, a growing sargassum crisis in neighboring Martinique is making world headline, right? News, because of the sargasso spread as wide as the continental US, this spread is heading our way from the Atlantic as a result of the greater warming of the seas by today's advanced climate change conditions. The French government is concerned about the impending effect of this gathering, floating, and moving crisis on its Caribbean department, and has thus called on its scientific and research community to find solutions, to dig deep and come up with innovations to turn the sargassum crisis into a pool of opportunities. So young and old French scientists and innovators are taking the opportunity to see how they can apply sargassum to agriculture, or how they can best diffuse or use the fumes and gases that come with the nauseating bad smell. But we here in St. Lucia have been there and done that. We have a celebrated young innovator, young Johannan Dujon of Algas Organics, who came up with the solutions that won awards at home and abroad. We heard much about the possibilities of application of his invented formula in Monrepo and in other areas of St. Lucia which are directly affected. We proudly boasted about his signal achievement of finding a way to put the stinking stuff that washed up on our shores to work productively for us. He was interviewed, featured, and heralded everywhere. But how have we optimized his innovation and scaled it up for national impact? Year in, year out, many dread our dry season, yet we continue to grow our own problems. As potable water consumption during this period continues unabated by domestic and commercial consumers, I don't notice any substantive effort to scale up the innovations of Carlos Noel of Laborie, who invented the Eastern Caribbean's first solar-powered mobile desalination plant. What a missed opportunity for mass manufacturing and global exports. Where are the other bright young minds capable of turning challenges into opportunities? This is what civil society is concerned about, and hopeful that those holding the levers of financial and societal power will support these bright young minds across political and social barriers and without partisan considerations. We must continue this organized effort to include all of civil society in turning our challenges into opportunities. And it is my wish and prayer that these many programs spoken to in this year's budget address will find and sift out these bright young minds. And so, Madam President, the call goes out to St. Lucians far and wide. If you are young, if you are able, if you are creative, if you want to take a chance, take a risk, find these agencies and tap these opportunities which are being provided for you, because one never knows what is on the horizon. So seize the dawn now. Madam President, this all-inclusive, full engagement approach is crucial to our survival. If we are to continue our pursuit of the agenda of business unusual, which seemed to be the agenda of the government, at least if we're to look at the programs and activities they've put on record since coming into office. An agenda of diversification, empowerment, development, and growth. The facts don't lie. To do this, we need marriages between public and private sectors and civil society to provide the investment capital, legislative framework, hand-holding, and psychosocial support necessary for sustainable success. We will need all of that and much more if we are to identify our young innovators, encourage them, and assure them of support while they develop their innovations on paper, on the 6,000 free laptop computers, or in their backyards. And these marriages between public sector, civil society, and private sector are crucial, Madam President, because time is of the essence. And I say that because in reviewing the Economic and Social Review, page 1, it paints a dismal picture of the global economic environment in some of the world's most advanced economies. And if you look at the page 1, these scary words and terms jump out at you. Global growth fallen sharply. World's major economies experience pronounced weakness. Reduced global trade. Supply chain disruptions. Investment growth weakened substantially. heightened geopolitical tensions, confidence fell precipitously. The fourth fastest deceleration during the past 50 years, increased energy prices, slackened demand, dented confidence, etc., etc., etc. All on the first page when looking at the global economy. It is only a matter of time, Madam President, if it has not already begun, before these shocks begin to directly affect our golden goose, our tourism industry, and start to undermine the gains which we amassed last year. The same document cites estimates showing that CARICOM territories recorded positive economic growth, with St. Lucia well ahead of the pack, moving towards pre-pandemic levels of economic activity. Highly, highly, highly commendable. And what an envy we must be to other Caribbean colleagues. Regrettably, Madam President, one thing that is not returning to pre-pandemic levels is the cost of doing business. The private sector well understands what these costs mean, yet, while the problem is discussed repeatedly at so many levels, not much has been achieved by way of consumers having a better understanding of why they have to pay more for some of the things each time they shop. Same thing with the impact of shipping delays on business and prices. The supply chain challenges started since COVID was declared a pandemic and worsened after the Ukraine war last year. But the only thing most people know is that with every new shipment of the same goods they buy every day, prices will go up. But why the prices go up? And what can we do to reduce our dependence on imported goods and focus on local production, especially on food items, is not explained well enough. And the same way tourism, community tourism, has become a household word, we need to start looking at how we can get food security to be understood at a household level, so people can start to understand the value of little kitchen gardens, of taking your surplus here and going and trade it next door with the neighbor who has surplus in other commodities. Start doing this thing at a community level. Have these community gardens that the neighborhood can participate in, and we grow and share and start there as we expand the possibilities of consuming more what is produced locally. The need for greater clarity on the application and collection of the much discussed health and security tax is also an important consideration, Madam President, particularly given the potential implications on retail prices. While we note what it will not be applied on, curiosity is growing on what it will. While the sin tax on cigarettes may be embraced with little debate, the business community and citizens alike require greater specificity on the health and security tax. Because, Madam President, transparency is not a partisan thing and doesn't apply only to governments past and present, but to all we do in the name of society. Uncertainties always result in the trading of allegations and accusations, claims and charges that are more in the realm of propaganda than helpful information. Let us not expose our citizens to this type of torture. Growing numbers of civil society groups and private sector are becoming fed up with that approach, and it is incumbent on us, the legislators, to ensure we translate the causes and solutions in language people understand, instead of with words aimed at stoking fire one way or another. Otherwise, accountability and transparency will just continue to be buzzwords that we buzz whenever a new buzz hits the town. Madam President, we know that tourism consumes the life of the man in me, who I don't speak of exclusively here today. But given all we know about the importance of the sector and its contribution to post-COVID economic recovery, The potential of sustainable tourism growth at the present levels is stymied by crime, which could impact the success of our community tourism efforts. Globally, the studies point to a growing demand by our visitors for an experience nestled within the heart of our communities. They want to eat what we cook. They want to live the way we live. They want to walk in Lucian shoes. How horrible it would be for crime spiraling out of control to start to give rise to demand for more all-inclusive type vacations. After decades of advocating on issues that affect the tourism industry, Madam President, I am hoping that this year we can redouble our efforts to bringing resolution to some of these age-old issues. Not to take anything away from the glitz and glamour of the budget. Not to take anything away from the amazing programs and activities which are promised to be financed and which promise hope and opportunities for our people. But there are some deep-rooted problems that we have yet to bring solutions to. And I hope that this year we can commit to addressing these and prioritizing them. Case in point, after decades of advocating for demarcation of our bays to enhance the safety for sea bathers, nothing has been done. When flesh meets metal, it makes for a horrible disaster. Yet, this is exactly what we risk as we delay the implementation of plans laid before us and discussions that we've been having since 1992. So even as we speak, users of the beaches from Radby to Pigeon Island are under threat of being lawn down by motorized watercraft. Private sector have convened meetings with so many organizations, from SLASPA to the Marine Unit, from politicians to PSs. Alas, Madam President, no reprieve in sight. The bill for this negligence will come due, and we will collectively pay a dire price if we do not expedite solutions to these issues. Repeated discussions with national agencies responsible for managing our beach vending activities have seen proposed solutions fall on deaf ears. Oversubscription by vendors desperate to make a dollar now creates a breeding ground for visitor harassment on our beaches with the use of foul language, ego strutting, and other criminal activities which go largely unpoliced. We offer paradise in our marketing, but provide hellish experiences to some of our visitors. And it is this minority that can be our undoing if we do not pledge to bring resolution to these age-old issues. Crime has attracted the required and deserving legislative attention these past few weeks and months, and the government's commitment of $170 million to fight it is very commendable, as is the provision of drones for the police, scanners for customs, enhancement of witness protection fixtures and programs. But as has been said this morning by some of the government senators, I agree. We all know too well crime is not solved only by police and magistrates and judges and jail sentences. Instead, just like we're often reminded that it takes an entire village to raise a child, it also takes the entire society to make the differences we demand. Here again, civil society has always advocated different approaches to crime and punishment through provision of opportunities and examples, but the responses in past years have been highly legislative than societal in content and form. While it is commendable to note improvements in education and social transformation, I believe it is time to consider more radical reformation in our approach to human development. As is customary, Madam President, a significant chunk of financial allocations each year go towards education. But what is the outcome of this investment year on year? Too many of our students still lack the emotional intelligence and soft skills to effectively navigate their way through the emerging world of work. Too many of our youth harbor inbred feelings of entitlement. The government must pass it. Too many of our students are trained to be Too many of our students fail to be trained and to be made fit for purpose to the demands of the emerging challenges in our new economy. And when you take a look at the innovations in technology, artificial intelligence, and the impact that it is having in the global arena, one wonders whether we would really truly be able to catch up, because it is moving, doubling almost every 3 months. Madam President, I humbly submit our education system, given the demands of the global environment, can be perceived as archaic and needs urgent critical reform. Too many young lives are lost, wasted in our system that is obsessed with teaching them how to memorize and regurgitate information instead of teaching them how to think creatively and unlock solutions to the problems we have sadly imposed on them to fix as a result of our mismanagement of our physical and mental health, our environment, our character, and our integrity. Children start learning by mimicking adults. What are the examples we are showing them? What examples are we setting in our halls of leadership, our corporate social responsibility, our stewardship of our environment, and most importantly, how respectfully we solve our problems as leaders? It is this attitudinal disposition that eventually wreaks havoc on our bays and our beaches and on our roads and in our communities. The fruit never falls far from the tree and only gives birth to what is embedded in its epigenetic code. I applaud the national efforts to curtail crime. I applaud the citizens sacrificing family time, weekends, holidays to provide volunteer leadership and steer some solutions into action. I applaud the football competition organized by Safe Spaces and the Dilly Correctional Facility and funded by private sector counterparts. This competition provides inmates with an opportunity to compete against other community teams on a playing field in Richford Dennery each Sunday. What a game-changing approach. What a game-changing approach in the engagement of our inmates at the Dilly Correctional Facility. What a demonstration of trust that change is possible and you can return to society and be a productive contributor to our growth engine. These little things demonstrate that faith and that trust. I applaud the work of Warehouse 11, providing a community space for young artists keen on expanding their horizons in the creative arts sphere. I applaud the work of the volunteer leaders of Citizens for Peace and Prosperity, an organization that I have the good privilege of chairing. These volunteer leaders who have volunteered thousands of hours over the past year to dissect problems, pen solutions, and advocate for change and implement solutions. I applaud the work of the SLHD's Tourism Enhancement Fund, its trustees, and the 20 companies who provide close to $1 million in donations each year to help finance over 300 development projects over the past few years. I applaud the community leaders along the Chaussee Road, from the communities of Georgeville to Grass Street, who are working diligently to create a game-changing festival for their communities over the course of the next few months. And I can't wait until the product of that discussion is made public. I applaud the 100 civil society volunteers who attended our civil society Kudme held last February to brainstorm solutions to our current challenges of violent crimes, and those on the CPP's steering committee who continue to work diligently to fabricate these recommendations into an actionable work plan. I applaud our social transformation officers. what a time to be called to office, and particularly those who have reached out to the private sector a few months ago to unlock funding for certification of 50 youth to become community-based peer counselors. The success of that falls squarely on the commitment of our social transformation officers. And I wish to single out and publicly applaud Sandals Resorts and their regional director, Mr. Winston Anderson, who passionately walks the talk of corporate social responsibility and serves as the glue that binds our efforts to stay the course. Winston walks the communities, hosts the meeting with community leaders at his offices, provides funding for so many of the initiatives, either through their Sandals Foundation or through the Tourism Enhancement Fund contributions. If we had a handful more of such private sector leaders, Madam President, it is fascinating what we could accomplish together. Madam President, it's good that more of such interventions continue to be championed in this year's national budget. But until and unless continuity and sustainability is maintained between crises, we'll continue walking through a faster revolving crime door.
Senator Aziz, you have 15 minutes to continue presentation.
You haven't called me.
Senator Ferdinand.
I was waiting to be called, Madam President. Madam President, I wish to invoke Standing Order 35.3 to allow the independent senator an additional 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just to be clear, 15 minutes within which he will complete his presentation.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order 35.3 be suspended to allow Senator Aziz an additional 15 minutes to continue his contribution. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many who have a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Granted. You may proceed, Senator Aziz.
Thank you, Madam President and colleague senators, for the extra time. As I was saying, Madam President, we were speaking about the faster revolving crime door. And I was about to say that crime is not only about comparing statistics of death and thefts, or violations of the sanctity of women and children, or blue and white collar crimes, or online theft. Instead, it is about doing what each of us can do to help fight crime. But our citizens need to be taught what to do to fight crime. Effective crime fighting starts with good parenting skills, impactful early childhood development programs, community spaces where our youth can unlock their truths and share openly, and a strong economy so we can all enjoy the dignity of providing for ourselves and our families. Yet, it's not only crime that affects tourism, as there are also those problems individual governments and citizens didn't cause and cannot solve individually, including problems posed to the tourism's recovery by regional airlift and potential fall in source market arrivals due to issues in the UK and Canada. Madam President, SLHTA members have sounded the alarm that this summer is looking to be a tough one, at least tougher than last year. Challenges such as shrinking airlift, expensive airfares, source market economic woes, and the lure of less expensive vacation options in Europe are finally making a bid for our tourism markets. And they are proving successful. At present, Most tourism executives are consumed with last-ditch efforts to sell rooms and market campaigns, but the competition is stiff even from our global neighbors. So for those tourism operators who are able to offer up experiences to visitors, it is imperative that we work with them to put their best foot forward. Tourism vendors need more upgrading to be able to accept credit cards. They also need to be encouraged to widen the local content of their dry goods by providing opportunities for closer engagement between our fine artists and our vendors who continue to vend too much not made in St. Lucia products to visitors who also look out for such realities to save their hard-earned dollars. Madam President, as we celebrate our own economic growth achievements, let us not lose sight of the fact that all is not well with the world. We must defend our hard-earned gains, and in so doing, we will find ourselves having to consider how we do more with less. How can we stretch that dollar, not only at a domestic and corporate level, but at a national level as well? Madam President, it is incumbent on me to address another critical issue that affects all of us here in St. Lucia. And I believe that issue to be the need for public sector reform. Though we have been moving from strength to strength each year, our economic growth has been hard-earned. We need to find ways to build resilience and ensure sustainable growth. However, the solution simply cannot be to increase national expenditure every year. We need a smarter approach, and that is precisely what public sector reform can provide. Our government is responsible for providing essential services to the people of St. Lucia: healthcare, education, infrastructure. However, the efficiency and effectiveness of these services have been questionable at times. We have seen examples of inefficiency, waste, and even heard allegations of corruption in the public sector, which has a detrimental effect on our economy, our investment climate, and our society as a whole. By implementing public sector reform, we can address these issues and create a leaner, more effective government that can deliver better services to the people, at least more effectively the promise put forward in the Appropriation Bill. By reducing bureaucratic inefficiencies, we can free up resources that can be invested in infrastructure development, which will attract investment and create jobs. Public sector reform, Madam President, can help us to build resilience in times of crisis. As we have seen with the COVID pandemic, governments must now learn to move quickly and respond effectively to unexpected shocks. By implementing reforms that make our government more agile and responsive, we can better deal with crisis and minimize their impact on our economy and society. This will help us to build resilience and ensure that we are better prepared for future challenges. While some may argue that public sector reform is too costly and that we cannot afford to implement such measures without increasing national expenditure, however, I would argue that this is a short-sighted view. In fact, public sector reform can be a cost-effective solution, as it can lead to long-term savings and better use of resources. One area of public sector reform that has garnered significant attention in recent years is the adoption of performance-based pay for public sector employees. This approach seeks to incentivize improved performance among public servants while also ensuring taxpayers get value for their money. The concept of performance-based pay is not new. The basic idea behind the model is that employees are rewarded based on their individual or team performance rather than just their length of service or job title. This approach provides a clear incentive for employees to work harder, smarter, and more creatively, leading to better outcomes for citizens. Currently, to my mind, Madam President, the public sector in St. Lucia is not seen as an attractive career option for many young people. By offering competitive salaries and bonuses based on performance, the public sector could become a more appealing career option, leading to a more motivated and skilled workforce, attracting even more brighter minds. By setting clear targets and benchmark for performance, employees would be held accountable for their actions and outcomes. This would help to reduce perceptions of corruption and improve public trust in government institutions. Madam President, while it is a common practice for governments to increase their national budget expenditure each year to address various issues within their countries, without proper reform of education systems, social services, community empowerment, and public sector, this practice is unsustainable and untimely, ultimately harmful to our society. Despite increases in national budget expenditure, generally, the feedback from communities is that our social services remain inadequate, with long wait times for medical procedures and a lack of assistance for those in need. By continuing to increase national expenditure without reforming these systems, we are essentially throwing money at the problem without addressing the root cause of these issues. To hear that it would cost just 2,500 EC dollars for an eye operation that could perhaps save someone from blindness that can be preventable blindness, and that there are 4,000 people or so on a list somewhere desirous of getting that attention, but we're unable to provide it, it's really something to cause us to pause and to reflect. Madam President, community empowerment is another area in which we must continue to focus our efforts. And I am delighted that our budget allocations this year seek to address this in some ways. Our communities lack the resources and support necessary to thrive. By failing to invest in community empowerment, we are perpetuating a cycle of poverty and social inequality, which ultimately harms our society as a whole. Reference is often made to Sir Arthur Lewis's quote that the solution to poverty is education. But when we look at the number of school dropouts, when we look at the number of communities which still do not have community development committees and organizations, when we look at the number of our students who are not participating in a uniformed group activity, we know that there are still gaps to be filled. We must therefore focus our efforts on reforming these systems in order to build a strong foundation for our economic and social progress. Investing in education, social services, community empowerment, and public sector reform will not only improve the lives of our citizens, but will ultimately benefit our economy and society as a whole. It is time, Madam President, for us to forge ahead with the momentum that has been provided to us by the last budget and this current budget, for us to forge ahead in our priority to invest in real sustainable change. Therefore, it is my pleasure, Madam President, to support the 2023 Appropriation Bill. Thank you.
Senator Dilly.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, having listened to the rather comprehensive and insightful review by my colleague, independent senator, I'm quite tempted to just say ditto and sit down. However, that would be shirking my responsibilities. So permit me, before beginning my comments on the 2023-2024 Appropriation Bill, to join my colleague senators in extending the best wishes, although I know it's a little late in the day now, to the primary school children who are sitting the CPEA final stage today and tomorrow. I was saying it's a little too late today because they've already gone through today's exams. But I know it continues tomorrow, so I wish them all the best tomorrow as well. I also wish to join my colleague Senator in congratulating the winners of the inaugural Jimmy's Awards. I somewhat reluctantly went to the awards because I'm not a huge fan of these award ceremonies and all the pomp and ceremony that attends them. But I was, like my colleague Senator, quite surprised when I got there at the number of persons who had turned out. I was also quite pleasantly surprised when I went into the room and listened to the awards being presented at the passion of the persons who were nominated and the victors. I think too often the tourism industry is almost a black hole. People sort of disappear into it, you lose track of them, you see it as almost a faceless industry. And sadly, the individuals who contribute so much to its success are not usually recognized and celebrated in any way. And I think the feeling you got from being in the room at the Jimmy's shows and points out quite clearly the desire and the passion of these persons who have chosen this in some ways as almost, I think we need to start treating it not just as a job, because for some of these persons it literally is a vocation as well. And we need to start recognizing it and treating it as such. And so I commend the winners, and I also commend the SLHTA and the Ministry of Tourism for seeing the need to recognize these persons and to celebrate them. I turn now my comments to the appropriation bill, and for most of the day, Madam President, we've heard a long recitation of all the goodies, as my colleague government senators have said, in the appropriations bill. And we've also heard, so all the backslapping, the congratulations, the chest thumping, somewhat deserved, I must concede, having read through the Economic and Social Review and the results that are reported there. This budget builds on last year's. In a number of ways, it can be seen as a continuation of the policies initiated last year. And last year, clearly, the emphasis behind the budget was stabilization, getting things, back to normal and seeing how we can begin to move forward. And having reviewed the reports in the Social and Economic Review, I think we can say that the government has been relatively successful. The economy has grown at a rather impressive rate. I think in all the years of me listening to economic reports, I've never heard of a growth rate of 18.1% in St. Lucia. And that follows on from 12.2 from the year before. But permit me, Madam President, perhaps not to join too much in the congratulations and to offer a counterpoint somewhat to the speeches that have gone on so far. Which is not to say that I'm going to criticize the budget, but I believe that there are some areas of concern that come out when you look at the figures, and some areas where I think perhaps we can shift priority just a little bit to perhaps achieve even greater success. When we look at the Social and Economic Review, it reports that unemployment shrank to 16%, which, as I believe the leader of government business noted, is the lowest rate since 2010. That is a significant accomplishment and not to be downplayed. However, we need to note that despite this, there was contraction, particularly in the construction sector. Agriculture also did not perform as well as the other sectors. So you have growth in the economy taking place, but some of the pillars that generally underpin our economy are not quite performing as well as we would like. And I'm particularly concerned by the contraction in the construction industry. It's generally known and said that construction is both a promoter and a measure of economic health. Usually the governments will use construction as a means of injecting money very rapidly into an economy. And it's a precursor for further economic activity, because private enterprise, when they're seeking to invest, will normally engage in capital investment first and then increase jobs, increase activity, other financial activities. And so as well, it's a reflector of business confidence. So the fact that the construction industry were to contract at a time when the economy otherwise seems to be booming is a cause of concern. I was listening to one of the shows in the week, and a social commentator noted that it is commendable that the economy experienced such significant growth despite a contraction in public capital expenditure. And he noted that largely what construction activity had occurred had been driven largely by the private sector. And that is commendable and something I think we should encourage and note with regard to the private sector. But I'm a bit disappointed when I look at this year's budget that the capital expenditure out of a $1.8 million budget is only $400 million, given the economic circumstances out of which we are coming. I appreciate that in normal circumstances you would not want to have perhaps more than 25% of your budget being capital expenditure. But I believe given where we are, given the performance of the construction industry, the government does need to look at public capital expenditure. I was having a conversation with my colleague senator earlier, and it occurred to us that it's a little strange that, and this is a random example of perhaps an activity that the government could look at, that we don't have a national convention center in St. Lucia, which means that we have, if we're talking about growth of tourism, we're talking about growth of events, we are limiting the size of events that we can host because we don't have a facility that can host, say, 1,000 people, for example. We are reliant on the few hotels that have large ballrooms, but oftentimes these are inadequate for the activities that we want to host there. The South, I think Viewfort would be an excellent location for a national convention center, particularly since you have the international airport right there. Persons come in and they can be transported very quickly to such a convention center. You could attach a hotel to it, or you could use it again as a means of encouraging the private sector to increase hotel rooms in Viewfort or in the South as a whole. This, I believe, would contribute to the growth of the economy in the South in particular, and I'll go back to the relationship between employment, economic activity and economic opportunity, and crime a little bit later. So I think that would have a positive effect on the crime situation there as well. Madam President, I am very aware that I'm encouraging an increase in public construction, whereas it seems when we look at the public project landscape, we have become incapable of completing any major projects. St. Jude Hospital has been languishing for 13 years. We've had a long discussion on that. It's yet, I don't think we've made much progress since that debate earlier this year. The Hirano International Airport finally started, but that's after a gestation period of almost 10 years. This project has been going back and forth for several years. It's been stopped now for a while. The reasons have been said, but at the end of the day, the fact is we are not moving our projects forward with any degree of alacrity and with any confidence. The Millennium Highway redevelopment is already behind schedule, and that only started recently, so we don't even know when that is going to be completed. That being said, I don't believe that the issue with these projects is a lack of capacity, but rather it seems that it's a lack of will to do what is necessary to get them completed within budget and within time. Why isn't construction on St. Jude taking place around the clock? Too often, public construction projects are treated like regular work. It's like you're working in a public service, so you come to work at 8, you leave at 4. And that extends the life of these projects to beyond the necessary schedules. If we were to look by comparison at the Boadouage Hypermart and even the Sandals Halcyon extensions, which are major investments, capital investments, where the works have been taking place virtually 24/7. And these projects, well, the first set of rooms have been handed over with regard to the Halcyon extension, and I believe it should be all completed within about a month's time. This project was being executed in under a year. Similarly, the Boadouage Hypermart, every time I pass by it, there's constant work going on. I notice now they've removed the hoarding, so you can now see the works that have gone on. These are examples of how a major project can be completed in a short space of time if we commit the necessary resources and use the modern construction practices, and most importantly, have the will and the drive to get them completed on time. Another area of concern, and I know it's been stated as a positive, and it is a positive, but I believe when you look behind it, it raises some questions, is the fact that the government has determined as a priority that it needs to provide $25 million in public assistance. As I said, this is a commendable activity because it is catering for the most vulnerable in our society. But when you juxtapose the growth in the economy, which I noted before grew at an average of 18.1% against an average unemployment rate of 16%. So you have growth in the economy, a reducing unemployment rate, and yet still public assistance has grown by 28% between 2022 and 2023. This statistic, I believe, speaks to a growing income inequality in St. Lucia, and the fact that a lot of the persons who are reliant on public assistance are perhaps what we would call the working poor. So they are engaged in productive activities, but they are not earning sufficient money where they can support themselves adequately. And I believe in some cases the government senators did note that there are persons who are struggling to meet their basic requirements. I note that the government has inaugurated a minimum wage commission, but I'm a little disheartened that no definitive timeline has been established for when they're going to report and when the report is going to be worked on or implemented, I should say. Further, a minimum wage will only go so far as in alleviating the difficulties faced by low-income workers. We will still need to address issues like affordable housing, both for rent or for purchase. Again, I note that much has been made of the PROUD initiatives and the planned housing projects for later this year, and I commend those. But again, I think there needs to be consistent attempts made to make housing as a whole more affordable in St. Lucia. Again, I note the removal of VAT on certain building materials, and if I can suggest to the leader of government business that in addition to those items that have been listed, perhaps you wish to consider doors and windows as well, because I think those are generally some of the most expensive items in construction, as well as some of the most essential items. The other things like finishing, those tend to be more personal choices, and you can control your expenses there by deciding on different finishes. But your doors, your windows, your blocks, your cement, your steel, and your galvanized, those are essential elements in construction. So I would like, and plywood, essential elements in construction. So I would like to suggest, since we haven't enacted the legislation as yet, that the leader of government business suggest to his prime minister that we add windows and doors to the list of construction items. Sorry, our prime minister, quite right. I should say the leader of his cabinet. Now, the problem with the inequality that I've noted is that it undermines the sustainability of our economic growth and development, and it undermines the main aims of the budget. I noticed on the front of the budget is health and security, the pillars of sustainability. And income inequality strikes at both of these things directly. Persons at the lower income levels are much more prone to non-communicable diseases, partly because of the nature of the jobs that they undertake, the nature of their diets. And I note somewhat ironically, and this is something that we're going to have to address long term, the items that we subsidize, the items that we have price controls on, are not the healthiest items. I understand why they are included, because they're relatively cheap. A bag of flour can feed you for a long period of time. If you can make bread or bakes out of it, I understand that. But perhaps we do need to start making some choices based on what's best for the society as a whole. And we need to find ways, and I lean into the suggestions made by my colleague independent senator with regard to agriculture and increasing and supporting subsistence agriculture, where persons can begin to look at alternatives to to bread and bakes as their daily staples. And we all know the relationship between income inequality and criminality. persons who feel dispossessed, who feel disconnected from society because they don't feel, they hear us talking about how well the economy has done. They hear, and it's, again, we were having a conversation earlier. It is very interesting when you go into some of these neighborhoods and have conversations with some of these, the persons who live there, as to how well informed they are as to how the country is doing economically. They are very well aware of the social and economic issues in society, and they feel that much more disconnected because they recognize that the country is doing well, but they also recognize that those benefits are not filtering down to themselves. And so they find ways of achieving and attaining the social, well, the material benefits that ought to come with a growing economy. I note as well that inflation is perhaps one of the biggest challenges that we are facing at the moment, and it serves to worsen the income inequality that I've mentioned before. While I understand that for the most part the inflation that we are experiencing is imported and therefore not fully within the power of the government to control, for example, we can't just change interest rates in an attempt to control demand for products. I still believe that there is room, particularly because the economy has grown, and particularly because we've had inflation, for the government to tweak its fiscal policy a bit. We can tinker with the customs duties, we can tinker with the service charges, we can tinker with the excise taxes to relieve somewhat or limit somewhat the impact of the growing price of imports, so that persons can get a little bit of a breather. Additionally, I think we need to seriously address import substitution. And again, I lean into the suggestions made by my colleague Senator with regard to agriculture as a whole. I think we need to begin again to explore cooperatives and other means of collective farming, because the individual farms that we have now are too small to enable us to use mechanization or to enjoy any forms of economies of scale. We can't produce sufficiently large quantities of food at a sufficiently low price to make import substitution a reality as it is right now, except for items like plantain and stuff like that, which are sort of endemic to St. Lucia and we don't import. But if we want to stop, as my friend was saying, stop importing apples, for example, and focus on mangoes, we need to be able to grow on a much larger scale. If we want to produce potatoes, sweet potatoes, to the point where we can replace all the Irish potatoes we bring in, again, we need to plant and harvest on a much larger scale, so that we can drive the cost, the unit cost down in a way that we can then see some benefit from increased local production. Similarly, if we're going to move into value added, we need to make sure that the cost of our raw materials are low enough that when we do the value added to it, we are not pricing ourselves out of the market entirely. Bearing in mind that much of our inflation is imported, I think we also need to look at ways in which we can reduce the transportation costs of goods to St. Lucia. Now, I know we don't control any of the shipping companies, but what I'm suggesting is perhaps if we can redevelop our cargo ports, where we become more attractive to more shipping lines, competition would then do the work of reducing the price of the goods that we are bringing in. Additionally, redeveloping our cargo ports would be a means of increasing employment in St. Lucia. We have adopted a model of using specialized international entities. So we're looking at a specialized cruise port operator at the moment to redevelop Port Castries and the Soufrière ports. I would suggest that we take a similar route with regard to our cargo ports. SLASPA can remain the owner of the port. They can get, whether it be a rental agreement, whether they're getting, the particular word is escaping me at the moment, royalties, on the goods that are imported. We can create an economic structure that works for us. But I believe we need to bring in the modernization, we need to bring in the efficiencies that these modern cargo port operators have, and that we can then make our port. I was looking at the quantity of goods that we import and comparing it to some of the other regional ports, and we have lost ground significantly. I think it's time for us to look again at our cargo ports. I think when I look at them, they look a little unloved. It's time for us to use this as an engine of economic growth. I return to the issue of healthcare, which is one of the pillars of the budget. And I note there were a lot of policy initiatives announced with regard to health, and that is to be commended. However, when I look at our health system, in addition to obviously the resources in terms of medication and actual medical supplies, one of the main issues facing our healthcare system is lack of human resource. We have a constant drain of doctors and nurses who are leaving the healthcare industry in St. Lucia, or if they're in the public, they're moving into the private. Now, migration is a complex issue, and there are often push as well as pull factors at play. But I believe that salary, and from speaking to some of the healthcare professionals, who I grew up in and around the healthcare industry, often salary plays a much lower or lesser role than we believe. Persons feel demoralized, they feel disregarded, they feel unempowered in a number of ways. And oftentimes we lose our best nurses and doctors simply because of that. They would stay on for a lower salary if they felt like they were being appreciated and that their hard work was doing some good. But in some ways they feel like Sisyphus. They're just pushing a rock up a hill, and tomorrow the rock is at the bottom again and you're just restarting. So persons tend to move on because they're not empowered. I note that there's an intention to reshape and remodel the healthcare services in St. Lucia. I'm hoping that as an essential part of that, human resource and human resource management is given significant emphasis, so that the doctors and nurses who are involved in our healthcare are empowered to make their suggestions and make their contribution in the way that they feel best serves the needs of St. Lucia. We also need to focus on the diagnostic services, and I noticed that there's emphasis on providing ultrasound for pregnant ladies and other steps. But it's sad that none of the public facilities in St. Lucia have an MRI machine or have a CAT scan machine or a number of these diagnostic services. It is too common for persons to move to Martinique to get what should be otherwise available tests in St. Lucia. We need to move away from a situation where Martinique is a necessity and almost an adjunct to our healthcare service, to one where it's an option, where you go if you really want to, but the services are available in an affordable manner in St. Lucia, and in a consistent manner, I should say, in St. Lucia, because too often we start with a service and 2 months later you go and the machine has broken down, nobody has decided to repair it, those sorts of things. We need to make sure that we pay attention to these basic requirements and ensure that in addition to putting the equipment in place, we adequately provide for its maintenance and replacement when necessary. Because that's another issue that we don't, I think, deal with adequately in St. Lucia. That is the maintenance and replacement of things. I look at, for example, the Darren Sammy Stadium, and I note with a bit of disappointment that a lot of the appointments that we made when we were getting ready for the World Cup in 2007 still remain at the stadium as if they are still world class and still cutting edge as they were almost 20 years ago. We need to constantly be looking and maintaining our public facilities and ensuring that the upgrades take place when necessary. Going back to healthcare, another policy I noted was the Golden 80 package. And commendable again as it is, I couldn't help but note from the World Bank data that life expectancy in St. Lucia averages 73. So if our average life expectancy is 73, why is the package of free medication only available to the lucky few who live past the average expectancy to 80? Again, I would like to encourage the leader of government business to perhaps re-examine that and ensure that this plan is implemented in a way that would impact upon the widest number of persons. One of my pet areas is taxation. I mentioned it on during the last budget debate, and I return to it again. I commend the government for extending the tax amnesty, and particularly for addressing the issue of refunds, which I think has been a thorny issue for a number of years. It's an area of frustration for members of the public who feel that their money is being held hostage by the government in a lot of ways. And I think the common sense approach of allowing persons to offset their liability to government against the government's liability to them is a sensible approach to dealing with this issue. And particularly, I commend them, the government, for giving persons a break on PAYE where their tax refunds are owed, because it means that persons are getting ready access to their funds. I commend as well the removal of withholding tax on payments of less than $10,000. I think I need to point out that while yes, it is a benefit to the persons who are receiving the payments, oftentimes it's a nightmare for the accountants who are making the payments. Keeping track and taking the 10% and making sure you remit it to government, it's more of a nuisance to the payees. So it benefits both sides of the contract, I believe, by removing the withholding tax payments on payments of less than $10,000. So I support the government's decision with regard to that. I just want to remind the taxpayers that even though they're receiving these funds without the 10% being deducted, they're still liable to the Inland Revenue to pay their income tax at the end of the year. So it's not free money. The concessions aside, I still believe that there's need for the wholesale reform of our tax system. The increase in the personal allowance and the $30,000 cap on deductions reduces the tax base while increasing the taxes paid by the majority of the sort of middle class and upper middle class. It does not affect the rich, because most of the persons who can afford it, who we would class as rich, don't get paid a salary. They take their monies in dividends, which are non-taxed. So in essence, the government is taxing a very, very narrow number, a very, very limited number of persons. And we cannot maintain a tax system where a large number of persons, in addition to paying no tax, are benefiting from some subsidies and assistance from the government. Because I notice the government has a number of subsidies that are being paid out and a number of rebates in various ways and forms to various segments of society. I agree with the position advanced by Senator Shalry that we need to look at the collections process, that too often the Inland Revenue sits back, allows taxes to accrue and does absolutely nothing about it. Persons die and they seek now to try and recoup the funds or recover the funds when attempts are made to settle the estate. Inland Revenue needs to be a lot more proactive and to go out and recover their funds when they fall due. The health and security levy, whereas I have no issue with it in theory, I think we will need to have serious discussions about how it gets implemented, because the implementation is really where the impact of this levy will be felt. I would wish to suggest that as much as possible it should be implemented only on the base price of the goods and services that are subject to it, and it should not be compounded by VAT, or VAT should not compound it, either way. Because if we do that, it's going to cause inflation to increase significantly. Also, we need to understand how it is going to impact on the administration of businesses, because VAT in and of itself is already an entire regime that requires businesses to conduct their business in a particular way. It impacts upon the efficiencies of businesses. if you add this levy, how exactly is it going to be calculated? How a person's going to have to deal with it on an administrative basis? These are the discussions that will need to be had before the levy is implemented fully. One of the areas of self-congratulation I note from the government is with regard to the government pensioners and the fact that they're being given a lump sum payment of $600, I believe. No, it's a lump sum. Yes, but it's a one-off payment. I think at this point, we need to treat our government pensioners fairly. They need to have a comprehensive assessment of their situation and a proper increase in their monthly pension undertaken. I know some pensioners who have retired, and I mean retired from the government service in their 50s and who are now in their 70s and have not experienced an increase for the majority of that period of time. You already, when you retire, are retiring on 1/3 of your salary. So can you imagine, let's say you retired in the 1990s, what your salary would have been then? You've not benefited from any of the increases in the government salaries during that period of time, and you are still facing the inflation that everybody else has to fight on. It's not fair to persons who have given yeoman service to the public service and to St. Lucia as a whole. And so I would encourage the government, obviously I don't think they can address it in this budget, but going forward, I think it should be a priority issue that we look at how we can increase the monthly pension paid to government pensioners. The other pillar of the budget, as I understand it, is citizen security. And again, as my colleague, independent senator, quite eloquently discussed, whereas we are very supportive of all the steps the government has taken, particularly with regard to strengthening law enforcement, strengthening the laws, giving more resources to the police, that in and of itself is not going to solve our problem of crime. I appreciate as well the social interventions, the increased public assistance, the recreational activities, the semi-professional football league, all of these things that are aimed at having some social impact. But I believe we also need to take steps to change our culture in St. Lucia. We need to start involving persons more and more in social and community groups, in uniform groups, where they can learn a deeper appreciation for their community and St. Lucia as a whole, and understanding that the experiences that they may have grown up with do not dictate where their life needs to end up. I had a discussion with a colleague of mine, and he was lamenting the fact that he had a conversation with some of the gentlemen in his area. He had encouraged them, he had arranged interviews for them to go to and encouraged them to go to the jobs and do things and change their life, and they had given him their full commitment. Yes, they're going to do all the things he's encouraged them to do. And then he came back the next day and they were back on the block doing exactly the same things that they'd always done. And I pointed out to him, but in some ways you can't really be disappointed in them, because that's the culture they've grown up in. Everybody that they know is on the block. They don't know anybody who is working, anybody who has a job. They don't understand the discipline that is necessary to get up and go to a job that you may not like at 7 o'clock in the morning, because you've developed the discipline of going to work. So these are when I say we need to change the culture, these are the sorts of values we need to start inculcating in everyone. I'm not just going to focus on the youth, because there are a lot of old persons who have never worked a day in their life either. And they've taught the same attitude to their children, is hustle some way, find a way to make our money, but not really engaging any positive economic or social activity. So we need to find ways, interventions which change the culture, get persons to develop the discipline necessary to become productive members of society. And in that way, we can hopefully make those changes that we wish to have, and reduce the level of criminality in our society. Before I close, I wish to visit one of my pet issues, which is governance. Again, I think when I read through the Prime Minister's address and the budget speech, he makes much of the fact that
Senator Lee,
yes.
I recognize your closing, but just to inform you, you have 5 minutes more.
Thank you. I'll finish within that time. That effective and proper governance in the sense of transparency, lack of corruption, essential tenets of his government. For me, one of the missing elements of that is a Freedom of Information Act, which would allow persons to have access to not just what the government thinks we should know, but what we want to know. So I'd like to encourage the leader of government business as well to look towards, as part of the legislative agenda for the coming session, the development of a Freedom of Information Act, which would allow journalists, allow citizens, allow civil society to peel back at the operation of government and look to ensure that things are being done properly. Transparency is the enemy of corruption. So once we have that level of transparency, I'm convinced that in some cases, corrupt activities take place because the politicians feel that even if the other side gets in and starts to investigate, they're not going to give the fullest part of the story. They'll only give the parts that suit them and their political agenda. But if we are able to remove the limitations on the information that's been disseminated, I think it would cause politicians to change their behavior and act in a more appropriate manner. So to close, Madam President, I think the government does have much to be proud about in terms of what they've achieved in the short space of time. When we look at the black and white figures produced in the Social and Economic Review, they've done a lot in terms of stabilizing the economy and achieving growth. However, the challenge that lies now for the government is to make that growth sustainable. When you've moved from 12 to 18%, it's very, very difficult to stay at that rate. And so there's going to take bold action. It's going to take very creative thinking for the government to be able to maintain growth. I don't expect that to maintain growth at that level. But what we want to make sure is that if we do have a reduction in the speed of growth, it's not significant. We move from 18, for example, back down to 3. We need to make sure that the growth in the economy continues and is as sustainable as possible. And I implore them not just to say the things that we like to hear, not just to make the promises that we want to hear, but to have the will and the drive to actually operationalize, because this is a very, very comprehensive budget. There are a lot of activities, a lot of projects in it. And it's one thing to state what you're going to do. The proof is always of the pudding is always in the eating. So the proof is always of the budget is in the doing. So I wish to encourage the government to do its utmost to achieve the ends and the aims of this budget. And with that, I offer my support. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Jean.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Good afternoon, colleagues, esteemed guests. Madam President, I wish to preface my presentation this afternoon by extending condolences to the families impacted by the recent criminal activity particularly in areas such as Vieux-Fort, Babonneau, Gros-Islet, Dennery, and other parts of the island. As we know, the impact of crime affects us all. I wish to posit that there is need to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder that results in the wake of such traumatic situations. I've been a victim of it, and I always liken it to one bullet splattering through families, communities, and the entire country. Madam President, I also wish to applaud the efforts of the Commissioner and the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, together with the RSS, for the successes in capturing and charging the perpetrators of these crimes so far. I note, Madam President, that there have been police raids in several communities where drugs, weapons, and ammunition have been recovered. Today, Madam President, is International Firefighters Day, and therefore I want to big up the men and women who brave all conditions as first responders at accidents, at criminal acts, medical emergencies, and of course, fires. I stand, Madam President, vehemently and unreservedly in support of this Appropriation Bill 2023-2024 as presented by the Honorable Philip Joseph Pierre, Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development, the Youth Economy, and National Security. I wish to applaud the Prime Minister on the policies embedded within the budget. I watched the budget presentation while overseas, and you would swear I was watching a cricket match. Not with West Indies, of course. Because after every pronouncement by the PM, I shouted, "Good shot! 4 runs!" That one was a 6 out of the oval. But Madam President, I was not at all surprised at the Prime Minister's second budget since July 21st, 2021. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who stated, and I quote, "If you want to see the true measure of a man, watch how he treats his inferiors, not his equals. The true measure of a man is how he treats someone who can do him absolutely no good. The measure of a man is what he does with power." The ancient Greek philosopher Plato also spoke of the measure of a man in what he does with power. Not the power to look down at people and refer to them as mendicants and jackasses and barking dogs. Not the power to refer to single mothers as breeders of criminals. Not the power to sideline professionals in the public service, now known as heroes, in favor of Ernst & Young for the preparation of the budget, the same budget that was prepared this year by the same heroes. Not the power to use public funds to stay in luxury hotels at £2,154 per night for 6 nights, plus food and drinks, and resulting in a total bill of £13,457.86. Or if we put it in EC dollars today at a rate of 3.4, would be an EC $45,697.22, Madam President. Do you know how many massive bags of groceries that could have been filled and distributed to the poor? The same massive bag that was used to bypass citizens who were perceived as those who did not buy into the philosophy of the other party, better known as the Belrose Doctrine. Madam President, I'm giving Senator Antoine some homework to find a bill for over 2,000 Swiss francs for a taxi from the airport to a hotel in Lucerne, Switzerland. Homework, Madam President. I wish that Madam Senator Antoine will seek to do that homework. Madam President, let me tell you of the measure of a man who holds the position of St. Lucia's Prime Minister. The man who was elected by the people of St. Lucia on July 26, 2021, and is entrusted to steer this country at this time. Of course, you know I served as permanent secretary in the Department of Infrastructure. In fact, at that time, it was ministry. We now slide to department, but Ministry of Infrastructure, Ports, Services, and Transport during the era 2011 to 2016. Upon assumption to office, the Prime Minister, who was Minister Pierre at the time, the Minister for Infrastructure, we briefed him on the effects of Hurricane Thomas. And one of the critical things that we had to present him with was a suspended rock that existed along the main road in Soufrière. We were concerned that that rock could have fallen at any time and would have caused a possible disaster because it was going to roll. There was a possibility of it rolling down along the slope in Soufrière, and who knows how far it could have gone. It could have been disastrous. The Honorable Minister at that time took the advice of technocrats and engineers, and he listened attentively, gave every single person an opportunity to provide recommendations on what to do about the rock. And finally, he made the decision to have that rock removed. But you know what he said to me? He said, P.S., I am showing you that I have drafted my resignation. In the event that this procedure failed, I am going to resign as the Minister for Infrastructure. No wonder, Madam President, this very same individual who has assumed the reins of Prime Minister of this country has taken on the portfolio of national security, which he carries with the greatest risk. How many prime ministers around the region have the portfolio of national security? Many run away from that portfolio. You know why? Because when things go wrong, when crime escalates, they can pass it on and pass the buck to another minister. But he has taken on that responsibility, and I know full well that he will do all in his power, together with all of us St. Lucians, to ensure that our country is secured. This is the man who has catered to all sectors of society in this budget, not the people of his class. Madam President, when I review the 2023-24 budget delivered by the PM, first of all, I must commend the government for the brilliant economic performance. A comparison of the performance of countries in the ECCU revealed that St. Lucia ranks highest in real GDP growth and public debt to GDP, among other indicators. And if I can just give you maybe a couple figures, because I do not want the time to come up on me. In Antigua and Barbuda, real GDP growth in 2021 was 6.6%. 2022, it rose to 8.5%. Dominica, 6.9%. It went down 5.9%. Grenada, 4.7%. It climbed a little to 5.9%. St. Lucia, 12.2% in 2021, and 2022 went up to 18%. Madam President, tell me, had we a leader who was not capable of prudently managing our economic situation and finances in the country, would have realized that type of growth. If we move, well, looking at St. Kitts, negative 0.9 in 2021, and it went up to 7.7, which was commendable. St. Vincent was 0.8, it went to 5%. But St. Lucia was spiked. When you look at public debt to GDP, Madam President, in Antigua and Barbuda, it was 92.5 in 2021. It went to 84.8 in 2022. Dominica, 109.2% in 2021 to 104.3% in 2022. St. Lucia moved from 90.2% to 69.8%, Madam President. Debt to GDP. It shows that our debt figures have decelerated at a really steep slope or rate. As indicated on Roman numeral 2, page Roman numeral 2 of the estimates of expenditure 2023-24, for a country to bounce back from a primary deficit of $220.1 million initially projected in 2022-23 to a primary surplus of $29.6 million is a work of art. Page 11 of the Economic and Social Review states, and I quote, "Notwithstanding the challenges posed by the external environment in 2022, macroeconomic conditions within the domestic economy continued to improve. St. Lucia's economy robustly continued on a recovery path from the unprecedented and sharp decline in 2020 occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, reflecting a V-shaped recovery path. Following annual growth of 12.2% in 2021, preliminary estimates suggest that real GDP grew by 18.1% in 2022, resulting in the stock of real GDP being only 1.1% below pre-pandemic levels. This performance was buoyed by strong activity in the lead tourism sector, supported by the full relaxation of COVID-19 protocols on travel, businesses, and recreational activities, with broader positive spillover effect on other sectors," unquote. Madam President, you would recall last year there was much ado about the budget financing needs estimated for 2022-23 of $505 million. Remember, Senators, it was said right here, it was presented initially that the government had borrowed $505 million. Remember that, Senators? After pointing out that this was merely an estimate, there was a retract. Remember, they had to run downstairs, get estimates, get social review. They didn't know where to land. in this year's estimates, Madam President, recorded at page Roman numeral 3, the actual borrowing by the government was $404.87 million, a reduction of $60.1 million from estimates. In this year's estimates, look at it now. The financing requirement as announced by the Prime Minister at page 72 of his budget address is $288.6 million. So we've jumped from a requirement, an estimate of 505. We actually needed 444, and now we are down to 288. If this is not prudent and skillful management of our economy, I don't know what is. Madam President, this economic performance is backed by benefits for everyone in St. Lucia, from cradle to grave. Maternal and health care program to be first stage of universal health care. Ti mama la pou même fait, mais yo hamere en bahay pour se ti mama la ki kay fait. Maternal and health care. You ever hear that? Inclusive education laptops to school children, allowing them a better chance to participate in the new global economy. A goal that every household should have a university graduate. An allocation of $500,000 towards government's university package of assistance. Madam President, I am not sure whether the average St. Lucian understands the significance of this $500,000 allocation. Because while we go out and we get assistance from multilateral agencies and friendly governments, so we get Taiwanese scholarships, Cuban scholarships, Monroe scholarships, but for the government to put aside $500,000, it means that they are also not just depending on the outside assistance, but they are putting their money towards the development of its people. The Youth Economy Agency provides training, marketing, finance, and mentorship to youth entrepreneurs. And the government has injected $4 million for soft loans and grants to young persons with interest in sports, music, entertainment, designing, creative economy, cultural activities, digital economy, arts, agriculture, the blue economy, and agro-processing. A space for everyone. Because right now, Madam President, what I notice with young people, they're not moving towards what we call the traditional sectors. Before, when you were at school, your mother used to tell you, you have to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an accountant. These were the areas. But now, the young people are interested in the non-traditional areas, Madam President. The launch of the Medium and Small Enterprise Loan Grant Facility of $10 million is another place of injection into the development of our people. That facility, I know one of my colleagues explained how this works. But Madam Mr. Deputy President, you'll swing on me. Under this $10 million initiative support program, the beneficiaries will receive grant funding of 70% loan and 70% grant and 40% loan. Where you ever heard that? Quand ou jamais tant un gouvernement capable pli l'argent passé ou sa prêté. And that's not all at 3% interest? Where you hear that? Where you ever hear 3% interest? The only place I've heard 3% interest is in US dollars. That's the kind of rates because of the currency. And it's on the reducing balance. That too is significant. So if you work out the math, for the maximum amount allowed under the program of $25,000, the beneficiaries get a grant of $17,500 and a balance of $7,500 goes to loan. So your loan is so much smaller than the total financing requirements for your business. I can never forget, Mr. Deputy President, when I served as Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Commerce. There was a young man who wanted to start a little hot dog stand by the old Ministry of Education, and he came to the Ministry of Commerce seeking assistance. When I saw that type of facility, he came to mind. Because there are some people who merely don't need all the $25,000, you know. You've got some people coming in, they're looking for some funding to buy a popcorn machine. They're looking to build a little, the food truck. So these people can benefit from that facility. And the loans are to be repaid either over 3 years or 5 years. If we put that against, if they had to go to a commercial bank, they would have had to pay maybe about 7 to 10% interest. And if they went to the loan sharks, I will not call their names, but they may have to attract an interest of about 20%. So that is extremely significant, Mr. Deputy President. So, and it sounds almost too good to be true. But this is the reality. And you know who can make it happen? Philip cares. Putting people first. So this is not just a slogan. This is actually practical. It is right there in our face. Madam President, 3,703 taxpayers have been paid their tax refunds already, amounting to $8.9 million. Businesses and individuals are granted a tax amnesty to be extended to May 2024. Now that is not to cause delinquency. And I hope that people recognize this, and people who have these taxes that need to be paid, they need to pay up. But I believe this is a measure that recognizes the pressures that people were under during the COVID pandemic, and therefore will allow them to recoup their monies and be able to repay their taxes over a longer period of time. All registered fishers will receive a tax rebate of $1 per gallon. When I heard that, I just remembered Senator Tousse, because I know she works in that sector. There will be no withholding tax on contracts of $10,000 and below effective July 1st. Mr. Deputy President, this is so significant to me, having worked in the infrastructure sector. Because I remember as PS, I did some analysis on the value to a contractor of a $10,000 contract. Because one of the things I was trying to present to the then minister is that there was a philosophy of cutting up contracts, cutting up projects to give everybody a little $10,000 contract. And I personally felt that this was unsustainable to the contractor and to the project itself, because you had varied standards, you had different things. Notwithstanding, I did some analysis and I looked at all of the inputs into, say, a $10,000 drain project. So everybody coming to ministers and asking for contract. Tout le monde veut contract. But someone who gets a $10,000 contract may be going home with $1,000. Because all of the materials that have to be put into that construction project, then they do not benefit from economies of scale, so everybody has to hire their transportation to drop their steel, their cement, their blocks, their everything. Everybody has to, maybe most of them have to do it themselves in order for them to get a little more. So the 10% withholding tax really brings them home with much less, having gotten a big $10,000 contract. So this is very, very, very significant. People who receive public assistance will benefit from a $25 million program, an increase of 5%. Remember the reduction of assistance to the disabled? Y'all forget? I must never make the people of St. Lucia forget. We forgot the discontinuation of the distress fund. Have we forgotten? Well, Madam, Mr. Deputy President, the distress fund is back. And people have already been benefiting once more from the distress fund. Putting people first. The home health care program is back in full force. And Mr. Deputy President, you know who benefits from this program? While the elderly benefit directly, think about it. The children of the elderly are able to keep their jobs while their parents are professionally cared for during the day. Remember the NICE program? It is now nicer under this government. Another major initiative is the launch of Golden 80+ medical package, where the elderly will receive free medicine at any public health institution. Another benefit to the elderly and their children, because at that age, most times, the children are the ones to purchase the medication for their parents. Isn't that so? Most of us at our age have elderly parents. We are the ones who have to care for them. We have to provide for them. And so we are benefiting too. While they benefit directly, but we too are benefiting because it's less for us to have to pay for them. Government pensioners will be receiving another one-off payment of $600 in November 2023, early Christmas. Last year, pensioners received $500. So even pensioners getting an increase. Have you ever heard of any other government which has done that? Madam President, if we are true to ourselves, we will realize that this is a government who cares. Mr. Deputy President, even smokers will benefit. Because as the excise tax on tobacco products will be increased by 50%, this is an encouragement to smokers that smoking kills. And there is need to reduce the consumption of cigarettes and tobacco products. Philip cares. I went into a shop about 2 weeks ago, and there was a shelf with cigarettes. And on each shelf it says smoking kills, smoking kills, smoking kills. And I keep saying, but why would I see a label that says smoking kills and still go and buy that product? But this is a move to discourage the use of tobacco. Lastly, Mr. Deputy President, there is provision within the estimates of expenditure of $3 million for cemetery expansion. So you see, there are many other initiatives which my colleagues have elaborated on But we can see that our government is making provision for every citizen from cradle to grave. So those that have not been born yet have benefits. You only benefit pool too. Cradle to grave. And so much in between. Mr. Deputy President, I would now like to recognize the infrastructural projects that will be executed during this financial year.
Senator Shaw, you have 15 minutes left.
How many?
15. 1-5.
I think I should be able to do it. Now give me 10 just in case, please.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I wish to invoke Standing Order 35-3 to allow the colleague senator an additional 10 minutes within which she could complete her presentation.
Honorable Senators, the question is that Standing Order Section 35-3 be invoked to allow the Senator Jean additional 10 minutes to complete her presentation. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of those contrary opinions say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senator, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. Thank you very much, colleagues. So, like I was saying, I would like to focus now on infrastructural projects that will be executed during this financial year. We must be reminded that many attempts at infrastructural development in the past administration was done using the design, finance, construct, or what they call the DFC model, which means really that projects were executed on credit. You take a So in the capital estimates of the Department of Infrastructure at page 583, you will see a total of $45.2 million allocated to repair these roads. So while, Mr. Deputy President, at the time when you presented, you indicated that the capital expenditure, the capital program was low, $45.2 million of that capital program is not for new projects. It's to pay for projects that they attempted. And I have to say attempted because we see the disaster along the Rodney Bay Road. That has to be repaid. So you will see a figure for the National Roads Rehabilitation Program, NRRP. The total project cost plus interest is $104 million. Chimè en l'air kwedi. For the Mark and Denry community roads, you will see a figure there of $25 million in the capital estimates. And for the Grosile and Castries North roads, there is an amount, a project cost plus interest of $40 million. Think about it, Mr. Deputy President. We all know also that all of these projects were done by direct award, placing the Central and Departmental Tenders Board in a comatose state. I don't think these boards ever met for a whole 5 years because everything was direct awards. You remember over 30 direct awards were signed in one day? You know what that means? There was not the benefit of competitive bidding to at least ensure that you got the least price, at least, or value for your money. You were not, they were not given, there were not any analytical exercise done to look at objective criteria, to look at quality, to look at methodology, and to look at all of these other factors in order to choose the best for the people of St. Lucia. Chaque bagay te direct award, and nous savons qui moun ki te ka hen direct award la, Milo men up person. But we all knew. During this year's budget, Mr. Deputy President, there is welcome news that the following projects will be executed. Construction of police divisional headquarters in Grosile has begun. Work on the Southern Police Divisional Headquarters, Viewfort, will commence. Repairs are underway at Canries, Miku, Richford, and the Masha police stations. A contract for the construction of custody suites will be signed very soon. Ou changer yo croise custody suites. A new drug squad building to be commissioned. Construction of an administrative complex and cultural center for the people of Viewfort and the South. Imagine having Calypso finals in the South, Mr. Deputy President. I am sure the animator is already overjoyed. Plans to advance construction of Soufriere Hospital and the government to sign the port development agreement once the terms and conditions have met government's long-term objectives. Mr. Deputy President, no agreement will be signed that has not been read. So tout ça yo ka di about GPH et nou havan pot la, no agreement has already been signed. I am sure the Minister for Tourism and the Minister for Ports and the Minister for Finance are still reading the agreement so that when they sign it, they know exactly what they're signing. Not like the signing, the contract that was signed for the south of the island and people can admit that they didn't read it. A contract has been signed for the ancillary bridge and work will commence soon. Mr. Deputy President, this is a significant bridge because it will replace the single lane Bailey Bridge with a dual lane bridge. And a Bailey Bridge in the construction sector is one that is used temporarily. Do you know these bridges have been down there for more than 30 years? As temporary as 30 years? You recall before the 2011 elections, it was a kind of little single lane bridge, right? And the government reconstructed they removed the Canries Bailey Bridge, they have removed the PI Bailey Bridge, and now they're removing the ancillary bridge. This is highly commendable because you cannot have 30-year temporary bridges. Temporary permanent bridges. Plans to construct the halls of justice are underway and is expected to start in the second half of this year. 4.2 million has been awarded for conversion of the old police building to the holding facility. Again, custody suites will be back. Continuation of the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project. Mr. Deputy President, remember work started in November 2022 after the empty box was built at a whopping $118 million. That box reminds me of a passage in the Bible. In the book of Matthew chapter 23 verse 27, it states, "Woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness." In this case, the outside of the box is beautiful, mais en dedans vide. Imagine, Mr. Deputy President, the government must now allocate $32.75 million to meet outstanding payments for the empty box. Another major decision by this government relates to the Uranora International Airport. Mr. Deputy President, we heard that this project, which is still at the foundation stage, is already recording major cost overruns of over $40 million. The airport has not even taken off the ground. At the foundation stage alone, it was estimated that the foundation would cost $1.9 million US. But it actually, the project actually, they paid $19 million US. To arrest this major calamity, Mr. Deputy President, as stated by the Prime Minister on page 58 of his address, a scaled-down version of the existing design to obtain a single structure by removing components including the elevated roadway, essentially a terminal building with a reduced modified footprint built on the already constructed foundations with the deferral or elimination of certain program requirements. The Prime Minister emphasized that the government intends to continue the project, but only after a competitive bidding process is undertaken. No more direct award. Mr. Deputy President, what was music to my ears was the pronouncement by the acting Governor General in his throne speech that during this year, it is expected that an enabling environment will be created for the supply of renewable energy with the amendment of the Electricity Supply Act. Draft legislation has been underway, Mr. Deputy President, I can tell every one of you here, for over 12 years. An enactment was imminent around 2016, but we all know what happened on June 6th of that year. And this legislation remained at a standstill. Mr. Deputy President, this country is missing out on tremendous opportunity from indigenous resources of solar and wind, and as alternative sources of generation of electricity using diesel, which must be imported. Energy independence and sustainability, which are the goals of the National Energy Policy of 2010, coupled with our nationally determined contributions of 35% target for renewable energy by 2025, are stymied by the absence of this legislation. I look forward eagerly. Next thing I say, Mr. and then Madam. Welcome, Madam. I look forward eagerly to the day, Madam President, when we can pass this new Electricity Act in both the lower and upper houses. The other initiative I await is the arrival of the special prosecutor. Madam President, I have outlined many areas in which St. Lucia will benefit, but one of the biggest benefits to everyone is the proposed removal of 12.5% VAT on plywood, lumber, steel, cement, and galvanized for 2 years. The person who is building the plywood house will benefit. The one who is building the Gokai Mason Kai benefit aussi. Those building walls, drains, the whole construction sector will get a boost from the reduction of VAT on these items, and the country may be able to cure the contraction that was realized in the previous year. To ensure compliance, government will engage in a price monitoring exercise. That's not the promise in 5 to Stay Alive that VAT would have been completely removed and only 2.5% was removed, you know. But we never felt the effects. Tout VAT. Yokaitiwe tout VAT. Olematrio. So after all these benefits, plus what my colleagues have referred to in sports, youth, tourism, justice, social equity, housing, agriculture, fisheries, and education, the only imposition is 2.5% health and security levy. And I quote from the PM's address at page 66. On goods and services except on food items, medicines, selected building materials, medical equipment, and security equipment. This levy will be implemented to have a minimal inflationary impact and avoid any additional administrative burden and cost to businesses. Madam President, if an item costs $1, the consumer will pay $1.03 because we don't have two. It would be 1.025, near 0.25 cents. So 3 cents, rounded off. An item costing $10 will now be $10.25. $100, $102.05. Madam President, my advice is that the responsible departments must ensure that the proceeds of such a levy is set aside for the purpose to which it is intended. That is health and security, so that these programs can be more effectively financed. In closing, Madam President, I want to encourage the government to ensure that public services are delivered to the people of St. Lucia under humane and comfortable conditions, and attention be paid to streamlining processes to ensure efficiency of such services. In this regard, I applaud the DigiGov system, which allows for services from the Civil Status Registry, the Ministry of Health, and the Transport Department so far. I look forward to the inclusion of passports and other services using that platform. Madam President, I wish to commend the staff of the Parliament Office who are ever energized, professional, and always willing to assist. Madam President, when you review the SLP Manifesto 2021, almost every initiative that was promised is already delivered. So, project, sir? So for the next few years of this government's term, we will be getting the gravy. I therefore reiterate my support for the Appropriation Bill 2023-24. I end with the scripture from Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 11. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for prosperity and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. I fervently believe that under the leadership of Honorable Philip Joseph Pierre and the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, that Jeremiah's prophecy will be realized. I thank you.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. And I thank my colleagues for their contributions to the Appropriations Bill in today's sitting. Madam President, if there was one day that I thought that I would be standing to rebut without having to point out the absence of the leader of opposition business, it would have been today. And I will be in the record once again for saying that, there we go again, I am about to rebut, and the leader of opposition business's chair is empty. But today, Madam President, it is even worse. He has company. Not only is his chair empty, but all three opposition chairs are empty. And so, Madam President, one of these days, maybe when all of us have retired and our children may be privy to Hansard, they would have realized that for the better part of the term in opposition or in the Senate, that my colleague opposition business of leader of opposition business would have spent more time out of this chamber than in. And so I wanted it to be noted in the record that this is continuing to happen. Madam President, lest I spend much more time on this, I want to spend some time to briefly respond to some of the comments, observations, and contributions made today. Madam President, it would be unfair if we continued to discuss all the theater, the drama that took place or that have been taking place in this honorable chamber. Witnessing people walking in with grocery items and messing up the table. I understood your staff had to do some cleanup after the sitting. You know, I think we have gotten to a point where this type of theater must be given less and less attention and more focus on the substantive issues that we come to this chamber to debate. So, Madam President, I want to reiterate a point that was made not only by government senators here, but I think was reiterated by others, and that is that this budget, this appropriation bill 2022-2023, reflects a budget with a soul. And I want to add a budget with a conscience, a social conscience that recognizes not only the economic needs of this country, but the issues that are critical to all sectors. And so this budget, Madam President, was balanced or is balanced. It is equitable and it is inclusive. And these are critical terms that from the day I was sworn into the Senate as Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Philip Joseph Pierre, in his inaugural presentation, even at that point, made it very clear that he's going to manage and lead a government of inclusion, bringing in 2 independent members of the Parliament into his cabinet. And we have seen how this has helped to create a level of tolerance and understanding and mutual understanding for all St. Lucians, except a few who continue to be mischievous. And so, Madam President, it is no surprise that this budget has a flavor of inclusion. It is laden with a feel for the understanding and appreciation of the average St. Lucian. And so that is why all of the sectors, Madam President, infrastructure, environmental consideration with the infrastructure, social programs, sports, education, wealth creation, and a number of other areas have been highlighted and focused on. Madam President, we saw a situation where this government has differentiated itself from the values and the practices of the opposition. And I'm thankful for my colleague senator who pointed out an example in this budget that demonstrates that, where we had noticed for a 5-year period one of our most important regional institutions, the University of the West Indies, of which I'm a graduate of, a proud graduate of, and I think many of us here can appreciate, an institution that represents the true value of regional integration as a Caribbean person, that as a government we didn't see it fit to contribute to the debt that we owe this institution. It speaks to what we value. And Madam President, I am very proud to be associated with a government that finds it necessary to honor its debt or its commitment to the University of the West Indies. Madam President, it is a fundamental philosophy that this government demonstrates in its disposition that has caused us to find it necessary to do so, while others thought it was more important to give $5 billion to CHTTI, and I think a few million to Cayman, and other institutions that have not delivered anything close to what a reputable institution like UWI has delivered. No accreditation, and our monies went away. But Madam President, I think it is time for us to acknowledge that we serve the people of this country as a government, and that our actions, policies, and decisions must always reflect what represents them. Madam President, our two independent senators made some very important observations, and I want to take a few minutes to respond to some of them. Senator Aziz made reference to the ever-revolving door, a very interesting way to coin the phrase, the revolving door problems. And he noted some of the issues regarding the imports, the import bill, which I agree with. And I did in my presentation, when I spoke on agriculture, underscore the importance of reducing the food import bill and improving our food security. Madam President, I want to respond and say that I agree with his observation, and that is why I will remind the Senate that in this budget, our government has made a commitment to explore alternatives to the usual importation of bleached flour and importation of other goods. And we're looking at exploring the expansion of honey. It'd be very nice if we could use honey to sweeten our tea instead of sugar. Also, it would be very good to be consuming CMOS instead of milkshake. And it would be very good to be consuming local cassava flour rather than consuming bleached flour. Madam President, there are strides in that department, and I want to assure the Senator that we will continue to work with the Ministry of Commerce, the Ministry of Agriculture, Export St. Lucia, as we have done in Dubai and other places, to promote our local products and to improve the standard that we have been using in terms of value added and productivity, so that they become world-class, or the standards that we have are acceptable on the markets. Madam President, it is also important that I note, based on Senator Aziz's observations, that we must incentivize the bright young minds that he referred to. And I agree with him again, that we have some young aspiring St. Lucians who have ideas, but they have no support. They have nothing to push them. And I want to remind Senator Aziz that through the youth economy, that is exactly what it was set up for. Transforming your hobbies into businesses and your skills into entrepreneurship. Madam President, the Youth Economy Agency has been set up. So we've made the first step to make sure there is the infrastructure in place, and as these young people come through with the ideas, that we have somewhere that they can go and convert these ideas into reality and into livelihoods for themselves and their families. Madam President, something that struck me while Senator Aziz was referring to some of those young people, I reflected on my days as a teacher, and I can note that one of the areas where I am hoping that my colleague Senator will continue to work with is through the school science fair. I used to be a judge in that event, and a number of brilliant ideas came through. We saw students using the idea of recycling, creative processing of goods and some of the seaweed and all of those things to make manure. We saw the design of bridges. There was a student who designed, I think, a third umpire quite a few brilliant ideas, but after the science fair, you don't hear about it. And I think this is an avenue that we can continue to explore, where there is innovation by our young people that can be channeled, picked up with the business sector, the private sector, and allow these young people to explore their potential. Madam President, the need for soft skills that was mentioned by the Senator, I believe is a very good observation, and emotional intelligence. Madam President, I want to assure the Senate that we are actually addressing this at this point. As an educator, I am aware that we have introduced into the curriculum the democratic citizenship education component. And under that component, it is really replacing what we used to have as a health and family life. And this is one initiative that is geared at building the character, the civic duty of young people, letting young children know from early that they have to build their identity and understand their duty as citizens of this country. The only issue is that it is not standardized and taught throughout all of our schools, but I'm hoping that within the next couple of years that the Ministry of Education will see it fit to formalize it and to do so. I just got some good news from my colleague senator that that there is some success, and I want to congratulate at this time, referring to the science fair, that there is a combined school, my alma mater, and another one here actually was very successful in the recently held science fair and won some very interesting categories. So I have more reason to smile. And again, if they are hearing me, some of my young neighbors and friends in the community can look to using this innovation to continue to improve themselves. So I think the observations that were made and the suggestions given, as a government that listens, we believe that a lot of the strides we've made have not just come from the head of one person. They've come from civil society. They've come from our business partners. They've come from our adversaries. But we listen. So I thank the senator for these observations and assure him that they will be noted, and as we go along, we will take them in stride. Madam President, Senator Lee also, the other independent senator, in his deliberations made a few observations. And he did mention that he felt from the budget last year that there was stabilization, which we agree with, and that this year he felt that the budget, we were building on it. Absolutely correct. But I want to let him know that he made a couple of observations regarding his wish that we had expanded, or we should have expanded a little more or done a little better with the construction sector. True. But here is what I believe I can offer. First of all, Madam President, as a government, we have to be very careful how much we borrowed to stimulate that sector, because we were faced with a serious deficit, and outside of the primary, the debt on the books, we had a very huge stock of DFCs that we are still paying for. And so the Prime Minister was very cautious in terms of how aggressive we were in the first year when it comes to putting money into construction. And you will notice as the years go by, we'll be a little more explorative, a little more adventurous in that regard. So we are trying to manage the DFCs, but at the same time, we are also making quite a few strides. And I want to stress that while central government has not done as much as we would have liked in the area of construction with borrowing, we have ensured that the other sectors, the private sector, is doing this. And let me just refer to some of the initiatives that I can use as examples. Most of these hotel room stock that we are bringing up, or that we mentioned in the budget, will stimulate the construction sector. So the 80 rooms from the Dreams, the 90 from Casabah, the Casabah Beach Resort, the 250 rooms in Choiseul, the 345. I think in total, when I did the math, 765 hotel rooms should be coming up within the next fiscal period. And Madam President, I want to inform my colleague senator that 765 hotel rooms will stimulate or will represent a major increase in the construction sector. And I'm sure that not only will the big businesses, but the regular carpenter, mason, and other construction based persons and entities will stand to benefit. Madam President, another reason why I'm very optimistic that the construction sector will be growing is because of the announcement of the removal of VAT on building materials. So you see, Madam President, it's not by accident. The Prime Minister and this cabinet understand we're doing things as, you know, in unison. So you have the private sector engaging in huge, massive amount of construction activity. You gradually deal with your DFCs while you stimulate the construction industry from central government, but you also incentivize by reducing the cost of building materials and inputs. So in that way, the entire construction industry will be doing better. So I'm very confident that the next time we come back here, Senator Lee will be a lot more satisfied with the growth of the construction industry along with tourism and the other sectors. Madam President, reducing the import bill was one of those that Senator Lee mentioned. But before I go to that, he did say that he would have liked to see a reduction in the VAT for windows and doors. I'm very flattered by Senator Lee's confidence in our government's ability to be able to do that. If he felt that we were not in a fiscal position to do it, he wouldn't have said it. I think he's a reasonable person. So he would not have asked us to do something that he thought we couldn't do. It's because he believes that we are capable that he's saying, so I want to thank him for that. But I want to say to him that we are a very responsible government. And when you begin to take those measures, you want to be fiscally responsible and do it in strides. So we've started with some building materials. As soon as we believe that we are able to absorb this and we can afford it, we will do so. So we're being responsible and we're going step by step. So the windows and doors, and in fact, one of my colleague cabinet members, I think it was Dr. Hillet, in his deliberations, made that point. He would have liked to know that the people in his constituency can get that same reduction on windows and doors. So we do feel that way, but at this time, I want to say that we're not going to be too extravagant and we're going to take it in strides. So, Madam President, with regard to the reducing the import bill, I think I mentioned that in my initial contribution. We all believe that it is important to reduce our import bill. I wish we didn't have to import some of the things that we do import. I go on the supermarket shelves and I see things that we pay for, and these are things that are all over the place in my backyard everywhere, and we have them on the shelves and we're importing them. Tamarind and all kinds of things that, you know, coconut water. I mean, I don't understand why that happens. But, Madam President, it is important that while we try to do everything in our power to reduce the import bill, we also have some external forces that are not very kind to us, like the WTO. And they impose all of their expectations where we have certain quotas that they expect us to still import. For example, chicken. I mean, I think we can produce all the chicken we want or we need in this country. Why are we still importing so much chicken from certain places? If you look well, you will notice that there are certain conditions that are a little bit beyond us, as we're not real big fish in the international market. But I think the more we can cut down on the import bill, grow what we eat and eat what we grow, I think we'll be a lot better. So I implore our local producers, our local manufacturers, our local consumers to take heed of the advice that was offered by Senator Lee. He did mention Freedom of the Information Act. And it might have been something that was not specified. But I want to say to Senator Lee, Madam President, through you, that there has been no time in this country where the press has been so vocal, open, comfortable, and free to speak to and speak about and engage a government and members of our parliament or our government. Madam President, these days, the press conferences and the press briefings and the press interviews are not only happening outside the parliament in the rain, and you don't have journalists running, chasing after members of cabinet. They are actually allowed to come up, invited to come upstairs. You know, there's a special, if they even have coffee, I think they even have refreshments. They come in, we make them comfortable. Every Monday they can actually come up to the OPM, Office of the Prime Minister, and ministers of government are willing and able to give them a hearing. This is not something that I knew that used to happen a few years ago, when the press, members of the press and the media basically felt that they were intruding when they tried to reach out to members of government. So, Madam President, there is a certain level of liberty and freedom that the press enjoys. It may not be formalized, it may not be in legislation, but you see no barricades outside when you come here, Madam President. When you walk into the yard of the Parliament, you feel that it's a place where people are comfortable. I've seen huge crowds of people protesting and feeling very free to do that. So we're not in any way against that, but I think the point was made that the Freedom of Information Act as a form of legislation, there is room for it. So very soon I'm sure we'll be coming here to discuss it. And when we do, I'll remind Senator Lee that it may have been stimulated or activated by his observation. Madam President, health and safety, that's a very good point. Health and, he mentioned the issue of, although we have imposed we introduced the 2.5% levy, it is true that the more information and sensitization that you can do, the better. So I believe that the way forward, and that is necessary, especially with all the propaganda that the opposition is pushing about the levy being VAT or whatever they want to describe it as. I think we need to make sure that the population is not confused about this thing. Madam President, finally, there was a very important discussion that took place about the growth. And I believe when you have an 18% growth, you basically have raised the bar. And it's like, you know, running 9.99 seconds, and you say, but how do I beat that? Because it's not easy. Madam President, the sustainability of this growth is not going to be easy, but especially when you have external factors. But I believe that there's a way to do it. And I believe this government is poised to be able to do it. And I will share with the Senate briefly some of the things that I believe we will do, because they are traits and characteristics of our Prime Minister and of our cabinet. Madam President, to sustain this growth, how will we do that? We will listen. Our leader is a very good listener. He listens more than he speaks. So we will listen. Just as we do in this chamber, we will listen to the advice of those who know and those who probably know a little better. We will collaborate. We've been doing that. We work with the private sector. We work with stakeholders. We will work with those who have common interests and who are interested in us improving. We will demonstrate the understanding, as our Prime Minister has done, demonstrate the understanding of the local economy and the global economy and how it works. Not just importing ideas, but doing what is practical. Madam President, how will we achieve and sustain this growth? Through prudent fiscal management policies. Not just going every Tuesday and have a Madi Poeti. We will do things with responsible approaches. We, Madam President, will continue to manage our debt, our borrowing. We'll manage that. We're not going to incur any debt. As you heard from Senator Jean, we have brought down the debt to GDP significantly, and we intend to continue to do so. Madam President, from the Ministry of Tourism and Investment, I will tell you that we are well poised to attract significantly more in the area of investment. So we will attract investment, and that is one of the ways that we will improve this economy. Because when you attract foreign direct investment, when you attract good investment, not fellas coming like Sakaboy, their hands in their pocket and talk nice and they have nothing in the pocket, but their hands, and coming to take what you have. But we will be attracting real investors, serious investors who are going to work with us on the terms and conditions that benefit our people. And Madam President, we will continue to grow the industries that are critical to allow us to maintain that growth level that Senator Lee mentioned. And these sectors, Madam President, include the tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, and construction sectors, while we try to improve, reduce our import bill and increase our exports in this country. So, Madam President, I thank the Senator for raising the issue and challenging us about that 18%. It's not going to be easy, but we're not afraid to say that we will take it up and we will do our best to make sure that we continue to grow this economy. In closing, Madam President, I want to once again thank all the members of the Senate for their contributions. I want to say to the leader of this country, Prime Minister Philip Joseph Pierre, well done, Honorable Prime Minister. Well done to a servant leader. That's how he refers to himself. Well done, good and faithful servant, some will say. And together with the public servants who have worked very hard, the private sector, together with the cabinet of ministers, the parliament, the people of this country, we are set to continue on a path of growth, prosperity, development, and a better St. Lucia for all of us. Madam President, on that note, I end by reaffirming my support for the Appropriation Bill 2023-2024. I thank
you. Senators, the question is that the Appropriation 2023-2024 bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to provide for the services of the State of St. Lucia for the year ending on the 31st day of March, 2024.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, since this is a money bill, I would beg to move that the Appropriations 2023-2024 bill not be committed to committee stage under Standing Order 65, and that the Appropriation 2023-2024 bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the Appropriation 2023-2024 bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Appropriation Act 2023-2024. Appropriation of $1,856,719,000 for the services of St. Lucia, for the State of St. Lucia for the year 2023-2024.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the Senate stands adjourned, sine die.
Senators, the question is that the Senate do stand adjourned, sine die. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
Well, we have come to the end of the Senate sitting today, and it's, of course, the matter for discussion was the tabling of the motion, the appropriation bill, it was rather, for the amount of $1,856,719,000. And of course today, as you heard, it brings an end to the process. Next, I suppose what will happen is that the matter will go before the Governor General for assent, and then it becomes effective. So today we had the government senators and the independent senators making contributions to this bill. The government senators being the leader of the government business, Senator Gubian Ferdinand, Senator Pauline Antoine Prosper, Senator Lisa Jawai, and Senator Kejiana Charles Toussaint, and the senator whom I just couldn't get her name earlier, Senator Alison Jean. My apologies for that. And of course we had the independent senators, Senator Dilly and Senator Norani Aziz. I did indicate earlier that senators, that's the opposition senators. That's right, opposition senators. Polius, that is, yes, Senator Polius, Senator Stanislas, and Senator Fede were all absent at today's sitting. Timothy Dissa en créole, nous venons au bout de session. Sénat là, côté discuter les affaires budget pour l'année 2023-24, qui est présenté par chef façade gouvernement, ça c'est le sénateur Gubian Ferdinand bon matin, avec après il présentait nous tenu sénateur, c'est tous ces sénateurs assumés façade gouvernement, ça c'est le sénateur Pauline Prosper, sénateur Lisa Jawai, sénateur Kejiana Charles Toussaint, avec sénateur Alison Jean, il a tout fait présentation avec aussi c'est des sénateurs indépendants, sénateur Dilly et sénateur Norani Aziz. Nous avons c'est l'autre trois sénateurs, sénateur Polius avec sénateur Harold Stanislas avec sénateur Dominique Fede qui a sous façade d'opposition, il n'a pas présenté aujourd'hui avec mais quand même il a passé avec ça qui a mené discussion au bout avec après ça qui a fait c'est il a mené par le gouverneur général qui a essayé avec il a venu loi avec budget capable du gouvernement budget qui a passé avec il a fait des affaires pays comme normalement. Well, with this we've come to the end of today's Senate sitting. We thank you very much for your participation and your interest in the business of the nation. Moi, je merci un peu avec un nom, c'est technicien, c'est Ross Daniel, mais aussi nous tenons monsieur Vibert Rameau, aussi monsieur technicien nous qui était Winston Cruz, avec tous les autres techniciens qui travaillent ici avec nous, c'est chauffeur nous, monsieur Josiah Alexander, avec aussi tous les autres qui travaillent GIS là, qui a fait travail pour mener ces présentations devant, nous avons dit merci pour eux, et aussi à notre directeur, et aussi monsieur Winston Springer qui pas possible parce qu'il fait ici aujourd'hui. So nous avons dit merci un peu Winston, all the best to you, and we return you back to our studio.